When I started podcasting, it felt like I had to figure everything out myself. Booking guests, figuring out rundowns, editing the show, and publishing it. It seemed like the list of to-dos got bigger and bigger. And when you're starting off with something new, it seems like that just happens. Finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. Get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into a with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/theathletic. Go to shopify.com/theathletic. Shopify.com/theathletic.
This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. What do you pack in your bag when you're heading out for the day? Sunblock? Snacks? Sunglasses? Well, now there's another essential, Liquid IV. Liquid IV is more than just a drink. It's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Visit liquidiv.com and stay fueled for a long day with sugar-free hydration featuring the new Raspberry Lemonade Hydration Multiplier. Get 20% off your first order with the code THERACE at checkout. When I'm travelling, I always like to have a pack of Liquid IV on me to help me stay hydrated when I'm getting on and off planes or going to and from the track. It's important for me because when travelling I am prone to suffering from dehydration and cramp if I don't use Liquid IV. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. It has 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients that turn ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. From acai berry and lemon lime to pina colada, there are a wealth of flavours to choose from, and they are always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. So get ready for a long day with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order with code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Oscar Piastri made it 3 in a row and 4 for the season with victory in Miami, leading home Lando Norris after both McLaren drivers fought their way past Max Verstappen. But was Norris right to be unhappy with Verstappen's driving at the start, and did that cost him a crucial victory? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to unravel the Miami Grand Prix are Jon and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Jon, we'll come to you first. Did you enjoy your somewhat unexpected and last-minute visit to Miami in what can only be described as a bit of a swap between the two of us?
Yeah, I think we can almost call it, is it a sliding doors Grand Prix? Because I think in a parallel universe somewhere, you managed to get your American visa and I managed to have a weekend working at home. But somehow in this universe we're in, I had to jump on that plane on Wednesday, a bit unexpected. So yeah, I came in a bit kind of eyes open to it all, but it's actually been quite a fun weekend. I think Miami's really bedded down as a race weekend. The paddock's great. I spoke to Scott. We spoke on the one of our members club recordings about just the way the paddock works so well. It's like a little village square. You can bump into people, see people. Just good atmosphere, good vibe, very social, and inevitably that brings us some decent news.
Yeah, I'm slightly disappointed I didn't make it out. Inevitably, of course, my passport with visa arrived a few hours after we'd basically committed to switching and you were already on the plane, so a little bit unfortunate. But Scott, how did you find it without me? Did you get through the weekend okay?
Yeah, it was so much better. I really, really enjoyed the fact that we made this switch. Really, just improved the experience all round. I feel like, I mean, jokes aside, I feel sorry for the both of you because obviously Jon had to hot foot to Miami last minute, which is no easy feat, and I'm sure undoubtedly caused a little bit of strife at home. But it's not like you got off scot-free, Ed, because you're actually looking in pretty good nick considering your the time you must be recording this at your end.
Yeah, well, it's about 4 a.m, but I've been kind of offset anyway, so it's fine. Well, that's very true, permanently offset. So, it's been okay. I mean, it's always a bit frustrating with the just having to wait for ages. So I get annoyed when I'm on this, actually at the race with how late everything gets going. So when you add an extra 5-hour delay, it's frustrating, but I certainly can't complain. And it was an interesting weekend. So we've got lots to talk about. And we're going to start off with our traditional question, although actually Jake Wilkins from the Race Members Club did suggest that this should be a how was the Lego race won? Because Scott, you were sort of watching that, weren't you? Quite a sight from the pictures I've seen.
Yeah, it was quite surreal watching it. I really wasn't sure what I was looking at because I was looking at it mainly from the big screens inside the paddock in here in Miami is located inside the Miami Dolphins stadium, and they've got the big screens around it, and they were been broadcasting everything on it over the course of the weekend, and I could see that the Lego cars obviously looked really cool, and then when I watched them at first it was like, okay, this is just fairly like. I really liked it as just like a nice little alternative to the parade lap. Quite cool to see them doing it, like that the drivers were behind the wheel. This is great. And then I was like, hang on, there are some antics going on here. And it was just there was just a moment where I was looking at it and just thinking, this is just the ultimate embodiment of boys will be boys. Like, you just put these drivers behind and they can't help it. They're just like, they're laughing with each other, having fun, and then just driving into each other as well. So actually, in terms of how the race was won, I was amused so much by what I was seeing. I don't actually know who won.
I think actually Pierre Gasly and Jack Doohan came home in the lead. And I concur with Scott. It was so amazing to watch. Everyone was captivated by it. Even though I think were they going at 20 kilometers an hour or something terribly slow, but it was just amazing. It's like you could see people trying to straight line corners and curbs and block people out and maneuver them around. But just think about how much money these drivers earn to be driving around in these cars, and it delivers a fantastic race. So I reckon in the future these Lego cars should come to all the races, and if weather conditions are really, really bad and they can't get the actual Formula 1 cars out, we'll just do a 5-lap race in these. I think it'd be brilliant.
It sounds like a perfect idea. I think we've definitely got, forget the sprint, let's just do this in future. Yeah, Lego cars. I like it. Right, well, we'll go more seriously now over to Mark Hughes for his look at how the Grand Prix in the non-Lego cars played out.
How it was won by the biggest performance advantage McLaren has enjoyed this season, winning by half a minute to the best non-McLaren, in this case George Russell's Mercedes. Piastri probably a little bit lucky in the way that things panned out for Lando Norris on the first lap, with a very inviting gap there for him to try and wrest the lead from Max Verstappen, ending up with him losing several places as he was bundled off the track and having to fight his way back through. But even with all that dicing, and it took Piastri 14 laps to find his way by Verstappen, and Lando another 4 laps after that, even with all that fighting, the McLaren still had way more energy left in their tyres than any other car. And that's where their advantage lies. It's an advantage, a little bit of an advantage in qualifying. We saw that through turn 11, the slow turn 11, 16 sequence through the weekend. But it's a massive advantage in race, when you have to keep delivering the performance and you keep those rear temperatures under control. And it's clearly something that McLaren is doing very, very well, especially at the rear, just keeping control of those rear tyre temperatures, not letting them get into a runaway state, and so allowing the drivers to run at a pace that's just out of reach to the others. As soon as the others try to run at that pace, the tyres would be shot within a couple of laps. So that's how it was done. This is probably the most favourable set of circumstances that the McLarens have seen so far this season. It's the hottest track temperature that they've run on, and not a coincidence probably that that's where the biggest performances come from. But we've seen in China and Japan in the cool races, they're still the fastest car. It's just not by as much. So yeah, brilliant performance by Piastri once that opportunity had presented itself after a couple of corners. So it made him the lead McLaren driver rather than Lando, which, given that he'd under-delivered in qualifying only 4th, was probably a bit of a lucky break for him. And as he said afterwards, really needs to... the chances of winning races from P4 are pretty slim, so it just fell nicely for him. But when that opportunity presented itself, he was superb in the way that he just wore Max down. He knew that he had the faster car. He wasn't in any big hurry to force the issue. He just was relentless, and eventually forced Max into a mistake, just pinned him in at the first corner, made him go in on too tight a line, caused him to lock his brakes up, didn't try to get too close to him as that happened, just allowed it to happen, and then just swooped around the back, and he was up and away and was gone. It took Lando another 4 laps after that, and he wasn't quite as clinical in his racecraft. He took 2 or 3 attempts rather than just one nice clean attempt. But yeah, he got there in the end. But that had established that it allowed Piastri to establish a nice gap, which was just as well because when they switched to the hard tyres for the second stint, Piastri wasn't as happy on the tyres, and it was just as well for him that he'd established that gap because Lando was much quicker on the hard tyre and got a almost 10-second gap down to under 4 by the end, although some of that will undoubtedly have been Piastri just controlling that gap. But overall, I think we could say that Lando probably was the quicker McLaren driver this weekend, and that was reflected in qualifying. But Piastri showed such strong racecraft and was so clinical and so calm. Just the sort of performance we've come to expect from Piastri, especially this year. So it's making for an intriguing prospects for the title battle. But yeah, I think in terms of Red Bull or Mercedes or Ferrari being able to put up a consistent challenge over the year, I think we can now sort of consign that to ain't going to happen. And the Mercedes, Red Bull were pretty even on pace, really, and Russell got ahead just through being able to stop under the VSC after Max had already stopped. That was pretty much all that separated them, really. And the Williams and Ferrari, in that order, were probably just behind them on performance on the race. And that's just how it was around this circuit at these temperatures. But that size of advantage McLaren had would tend to suggest that they're going to be pretty much unbeatable over a season.
Great stuff as always there from Mark. Right, Scott, let's talk a little bit more about that battle between Norris and Verstappen through the first few corners. Was Norris right to be annoyed?
Yes and no. Yes, right to be annoyed in the sense that any driver who kind of is in that situation is going to be frustrated. I think, because it's, and this is why I didn't think he had a right to be annoyed, because it was a 50-50 in my opinion, maybe ever so slightly a few percentage either side at most. But I don't think what Max did was egregious into turn two. Aggressive, yes. Uncompromising, yes. But these are all terms that you will always associate with Verstappen when he's defending any position, let alone a race lead. But the nature of that kind of situation means that the driver that comes off best will think they've done nothing wrong, and the driver that comes off worst will feel hard done by. It was about as classic a 6 of one, half a dozen to the other as you can kind of imagine. So I didn't think that was too problematic. Much like how they then raced later on in the Grand Prix, I don't think anyone overstepped in terms of driving unfairly or anything like that. And if anything, I would say that's what Norris has more to be annoyed about. It's kind of how he played the kind of second round of the two squabbling once he'd caught Verstappen back up.
Yeah, it was an interesting little case study that. But on that first corner, second corner thing, really, I think the other thing that's important to remember is that Verstappen had a little bit of a wobble as well. It also wasn't intentional as well. And for me, it's one of those things that when you're going around the outside of someone, even through sort of an acceleration type corner like that, there's always a little bit of a risk. So it's, that kind of thing can happen. But John, you, I think, heard from Andrea Stella after the race. What did he have to say about that phase of the race, specifically the first lap with Norris?
He thought actually that Norris should have backed off and followed Max through turn two. He felt that the pace was there, and he thinks that Lando would have subsequently got past Max and gone on and then potentially won the race. He thinks in that scenario, while he welcomes Lando being aggressive, he thought it was unnecessary, basically, that you've got to concede position. And we've talked about the drivers' guidelines and quite a bit. We've done videos and written stories on it and how they've changed this year, and how it's now getting nigh on impossible to overtake anyone around the outside because you no longer have the right to racing room, pretty much, which played out later in the race. So I think that was, Stella's perspective on that was that at that point, Lando should have backed off and followed him out.
The one thing I'd add on that is that obviously what was going on into turn two happened in a split second in terms of what capacity or room Norris had to react. So while I think he had I didn't have any issue with what Verstappen did, I don't think Norris was particularly naive or anything into turn two either, because the nature of how Verstappen had gone deep into turn one and the way they came out that corner meant Norris kind of had nowhere to go other than go to the outside of Verstappen. And if he was going to try and tuck back in, he had probably a split second to decide to do that. And even then, braking because I think he needed to brake, I don't think he could have just lifted and slotted back in. Depending on the moment he decided to do it, it did run the risk of him getting swamped by other cars potentially or being passed by someone else. So I can see why Norris did feel a little bit, and then this applied to the other moves which we're about to discuss, I'm sure. I can see why Norris did feel a little bit like, well, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't, because if I don't try, people criticise me, and if I do try, people criticise me. So I do understand that side of things as well.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with you. Norris was also kind of where he had to be as well. So yeah, just one of those things. But I was very interested in how we saw Piastri and Norris approaching the battle with Verstappen. Obviously, Piastri was working on Verstappen while Norris was closing in. He got by with that turn one move, and then Norris lost a reasonable amount of time while trying to get through Verstappen as well. That was enough for Piastri to kind of break away. But I don't know, I was speaking to you as it was happening, and I thought Piastri calculated it well, because it's subtle differences, but the way I interpreted it was that Piastri wasn't trying to full on make the move in turn one. He was kind of working on Verstappen, I think an American commentator might call it. Whereas I feel Norris sort of felt a little bit more like he could sort of try to go around the outside, certainly the first time he tried to do it. Very subtle differences, and you kind of ended up with a similar outcome in the end. But I just thought Piastri just had that little 5% slightly more racing nous about him when he did it.
Yeah, I would say that the difference between the two was that Piastri never overcommitted on the outside. I wonder if, because obviously the way that Norris finally bested Verstappen last year was that move around the outside in Mexico. And he was able to finally beat Verstappen on his own terms, racing hard but fair, not taking any liberties, using the guidelines to his advantage. And that's what Norris's failed move into turn one felt like when he got such a good run on the outside of Verstappen. I think he thought he could replicate what he did in Mexico, because he was so far ahead that even if Max came back, Norris would be able to hang on around the outside, and if he got forced wide, then the rules would be in his favour. Or you never know, he might hang on. He very, very nearly did hang on and then claim the inside line into turn two. He just couldn't quite hang it out there. But he left himself basically with that being an all or nothing move around the outside. If it didn't come off, it was failing. With what Piastri did, and no two overtakes are the same, so positionally it wasn't the same. The different speeds and entry speeds into the corner were slightly different. But what Piastri did was give himself the option of doing exactly what he did, which was cut back. It was that fractional, a few percent less committed to that outside move. And we will never know, because you can't know 100% what each driver was thinking. But it was almost like with Piastri, he was goading Verstappen into the stay ahead at all cost into turn one, and then run wide and then cut back underneath. Whereas Norris was obviously so much on the element of staying all the way around the outside that he didn't have that. He didn't have that flexibility. So you say, I think Piastri gave himself more options, raced a little bit more cleverly, and then by doing that, he was then able to take advantage when Verstappen made the mistake that he did, because it is worth pointing out that he did make a bigger mistake against Piastri than he did Norris, so he gave Piastri more of an opportunity, and that allowed Piastri to be efficient in passing him. And Jon and I were explaining earlier, and Jon can actually explain this a bit better than me, even though the kind of duration of their battles in lap terms were actually sort of broadly in the same ballpark, Norris versus Verstappen and Piastri versus Verstappen, it was the time loss once he finally actually tried to make a move that was much more efficient on Piastri's side.
Yeah, because when Piastri got past, he was through. Then Lando, basically a lap later, was having a go himself. So, and at that stage, when he failed to make the move at turn one and got squeezed, he was 1.6 seconds back from Piastri. If he'd got through then I think we had a very much proper race on our hands. Especially considering, I think there was an element that the 14 laps that Oscar had behind Max had hurt the tyres a little bit, so they probably weren't as good as Norris's were, who finally had been overtaking, but he wasn't stuck in dirty air for 14 laps. It then took Lando another 2 laps to have another go, which was that move down the turn 11 inside, which didn't work because he ran wide off the track. And then according to the driving guidelines, because that move wasn't completed on track, had to give the position back. Had he pulled that move off, he would have been 5.5 to 6 seconds back, which I still think would have given us a race at the end, because that was probably the margins we were into. But then he had to give the position back, which then dropped him to 8 seconds adrift. And then by the time he finally made that move, turn 11 on lap 18, it was 8.7 seconds back and then drifted a bit more. So this is the phase where the race was lost. So fine, it took him a couple of laps, but by the time he was through, it was gone. If he'd made the move stick from the first lap, it was massively game on for a fantastic race. But the sense I had from the pair of them today was, and I think Max also, is the way they're now playing to these new driving guidelines, which pretty much gives the green light to a driver trying to overtake on the inside, that the second their front wheels alongside the mirror, at some point prior to the apex and at the apex, then the corner's lost. So if you're a defending driver now, there's absolutely no way you want to give anyone any room down the inside, because you can't win that corner. You've got to force them to go down the outside. So I think this is why that radio message came to Max about keep the inside. I think Oscar Piastri had already had a kind of his moment with Max in Jeddah. Well knows these driving guidelines, well knows the rights and wrongs and positions and all that sort of thing. He played it beautifully. I think Lando trying to go around the outside is not going to work. Max is going to give you no room because he doesn't have to. He knows exactly where that car needs to be positioned, what the rights and wrongs are. So it'll be a learning exercise. And I expect maybe some kind of more revisions of drivers on the exact wording of those driving guidelines going forward. So I don't think this is going to be the first and only time we're going to see these issues and drivers being ultra defensive and hogging that inside line now.
In the context of the Norris Verstappen fight in particular, or fights really, because obviously it spanned a couple of different parts of it. Before we get on to sort of Verstappen and his job over the weekend as a whole, it's probably worth just discussing very briefly the thing that Norris said in the press conference about Verstappen not racing very smartly and thinking that he actually compromised his own race an unnecessary amount by how much he defended against Norris, and says that, Verstappen could have finished third and didn't, and that was because of what he was doing. How much do you buy that, Ed? Because obviously we were talking a lot during the race, and actually don't think either of us really thought automatically at the time that this was stupid from Verstappen or anything. Like, he was costing himself race time. That much is true. He didn't run his most efficient race. That much is also true. But there was at least a part of it at the time where it's, against Piastri you're racing for the lead, and then with Norris you're racing against the driver that you do think you've got the better of, and that you in terms of wheel to wheel. So you think you might be able to keep him behind. Now, in hindsight, with the amount of because the McLaren pace advantage was ridiculous once the race really got going. Of course, in hindsight, Verstappen should have just let Norris go. He wasn't in that race in the end. He was in a race for third. But in the moment, I don't think you can know that. I don't know. I thought that was a little bit of a maybe unnecessary taunt from Norris towards Verstappen, even if it wasn't completely unjustified in terms of the fact that it was probably true in that Verstappen hurt his own race.
Yeah, to an extent, although fundamentally the reason he didn't finish third was the timing of the VSC that allowed Russell to get the pit stop. So, yes, it contributed to it, and you always want to minimise your race time. So I don't think it was the decider there. I think the VSC misfortune was, and Verstappen will have known when he was battling with the McLarens that he had a little bit of a cushion, and he was still ahead of the others. So, you always want to maximise the cushion you've got, but I don't have a huge problem with it. I think the one thing I would say about these McLaren drivers versus Verstappen things, I think a lot of people will want to force this weekend into showing, Piastri has shown he's absolutely the number one McLaren driver. Norris loses out again. And there's a little bit of that, especially given Norris only won the sprint because of the timing of the safety car being deployed, the VSC, which allowed him to make his stop and re-emerge ahead. But it's still really, really close. Norris was quick this weekend. If he gets through turn 2, he probably wins the race. So I think Piastri's had a phenomenal start to the season, and you'd have to say on the season so far, he has been overall the stronger McLaren driver. But this battle between those two, there's still a long way to go in it. Yeah, I think Piastri's done fantastically well, but it's not a done deal, even though I think people want to shove it into that narrative at this stage. So there's still lots to look forward to in that particular fight. John, let's talk about Verstappen, because he did put the Red Bull on pole position. Given he ended up 4th in the Grand Prix and he lost that same position in the sprint to a penalty, do you think this weekend overall shows the car and team isn't going to be strong enough to hang on in there in the championship fight?
I still think that depends on Spain. I still think that we've not kind of understood fully the extent of what is going to change. Lots of people, we kind of go through waves of this, where we go through a weekend where some teams say Spain's going to be a massive reset, then it fades away and teams say nothing's going to change. And now suddenly, as people are finalising upgrades and everything, people are now talking of a reset and a big shuffle in Spain. I don't think anyone knows what the shuffle will be or how it will go or who it will affect, who it will help, who it will cost. But I think there's more and more likelihood that something's going to shuffle for Spain. And I think that will depend on Red Bull's championship from then on, because today's exposed the worst of the Red Bull in hot conditions. Tyre management nowhere near as good as McLaren, not helped by their brakes overheating. It's been a problem all season for them, so we haven't quite got an explanation of what's going on with their brakes, but something's happening with their brakes that isn't helping their situation. So, Max can hustle cars in qualifying when McLaren isn't at its best. In the races where there's thermal management, McLaren's leagues ahead, which we had today. So a lot will depend on the weather at races. But if Max can get ahead, say Imola, for example, where you can't overtake if it's cool, potentially could stay there. You've then got Monaco. So nothing's lost yet. I think the situation looks bleaker than it did, say, after Japan, when we felt that, potentially there was opportunity for him to be there and the car's there. But I think any suggestion we had ahead of this weekend, many felt that McLaren's advantage wasn't huge on tyres and was big, or something had changed and they'd been hauled back to the pack's been completely blown apart, because McLaren were in a different league today. If this carries on for 4, 5, 6 races, then forget any hope of Max Verstappen being able to hang on at all.
Yeah, 32 points I think he is now down on Piastri. We should briefly mention the fact that George Russell obviously did finish third, but there was a yellow flag investigation which was instigated by a protest from Red Bull. I don't know whether you want to talk about that particularly, Scott, but the basic upshot was, did he comply with the requirement to reduce speed as defined? And Red Bull said he didn't, but the steward said yes, he did.
Yeah, I guess it was on a sort of niche level. It was an interesting evaluation of kind of the rule as written versus the rule as intended, wasn't it? Because obviously you need to slow sufficiently during a yellow flag situation. And Red Bull's point was that actually Russell's speed didn't reduce, because although yes he lifted, his speed didn't get lower, because it just meant that he wasn't accelerating as much as he would have been, and obviously the stewards felt that actually Russell had not a reduced speed as such, but in terms of had reacted appropriately, effectively, which is the most important thing. The stewards said that common practice is, as accepted by all the teams and the FIA, it's a significant lift of the throttle in a yellow flag zone is sufficient and appropriate, and that's what Russell did. So yeah, it was very simple. And Mercedes actually argued as well that Russell lifted more significantly than what they could see from other cars. So if you're going to punish Russell, I guess you'd have had to have punished everybody. Who knows? Maybe even Verstappen.
Absolutely, but yeah, that meant Russell hung on to that podium finish that he got as a result of the VSC timing.
Life is busy, but often the hardest thing about work is the constant noise and distractions. I sat down to write this ad and a text went ping and an email went ding, and that made me realise I hadn't replied to someone from yesterday, and guess what? I'm going to be late for my next meeting too. Yep, it's more challenging than ever to meet the demands of today's competing priorities without some help. And that's where Grammarly comes in. Grammarly is the essential AI communication assistant that boosts productivity so you can get more of what you need done faster, no matter what or where you're writing. And sure, Grammarly can help with your spelling and grammar, but what I like best is that it works seamlessly in the apps you already use, like Slack, Gmail, Office and Outlook, without any need to copy and paste. In fact, 90% of professionals say Grammarly has saved them time writing and editing their work. So let Grammarly take the busy work off of your plate so you can focus on high impact work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by the Singapore Grand Prix. Singapore is, of course, the original F1 night race, and if you've never watched F1 in the flesh, under the lights, it's certainly a spectacle to behold. Since Singapore introduced the concept in 2008, a few other events have replicated the idea of a night race, but nowhere does it quite like Singapore, where you have 20 vibrantly coloured F1 cars brilliantly illuminated against the stunning Singapore cityscape. It's honestly a wonder to behold, and you can see it for yourself. Single and 3-day tickets for this year's race are available now. Just head to singaporegp.sg to make your selection. It's sure to be a turbocharged weekend, so you won't regret it. Right, Scott, let's talk a little bit more about Mercedes. But although Russell was on the podium, in many ways, this was Kimi Antonelli's weekend. He was the big story at Mercedes with that pole for the sprint. And although that race went wrong for him and he was down in 6th in the Grand Prix, how significant do you think this weekend was for him?
I think it was very significant. I think it was probably on two counts. One is the speed that he showed not effortlessly, but just so naturally from the start of practice. Almost, it was almost like a coming together of everything that he's learned and developed over these first few weekends, where he'd laid that really strong foundation for his rookie season, and then this was the first real flourish, the first real sign of that searing speed that we've seen in karting and junior categories from Antonelli, and that Mercedes is so excited about. And then it's significant for the other reason that he didn't deliver on it in the race. He'll have learned a lot from the sprint and the Grand Prix in terms of what went wrong. I asked Toto Wolff about that after the race, and lessons learned in terms of racecraft into turn one in the sprint. I spoke to Kimi about the. Actually, I bumped into him in the paddock this morning, and he said that start was like it was just the sort of second phase, getting a little bit of wheel spin there that left him vulnerable, and then he tried to be aggressive with Piastri. He felt that both of them were on the limit, and that maybe contact was a little bit avoidable. So his main lesson there was, if he's on the inside, he knows how good he can give it on the inside. So he's learned something there, and I suspect he'll also learn a little bit about where, if possible, in the future he might be able to yield in that scenario. And then in the Grand Prix, Wolff said inexperience just in terms of managing the tyre, how hard to push, when to push, that kind of thing. This is a really tough race for that. Don't forget, Mercedes is coming off the back of a really bruising one in Saudi Arabia on that score. So, Wolff was very open about the fact that Antonelli's pace on the medium was maybe not quite as strong as it needed to be, given how much Russell could live with him on the hard. And then once Antonelli was on the hard, he just struggled to manage that. Not manage, that makes it, because it wasn't about getting it to the end, but he struggled to know how to kind of execute on that tyre optimally. So I just think that's why I think it's significant. One, because of what he showed, and two, because of what he learned.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the fact we wanted to see a bit of that stellar pace coming in, and we've seen that. And he put it together with solid results. Ultimately, he was robbed of points in the sprint by that unsafe release by Red Bull, which incidentally, he was very, very sharp to avoid that being a bigger incident. Verstappen contributed a little bit as well because he steered out of it a bit, but Antonelli was quite sharp there as well. So yeah, I think this is an important weekend on his trajectory, and I think builds nicely on what he'd done in the first 5 weekends. Should we talk about Williams now, John? Because they were very fast in Miami. Alex Albon was 5th, Carlos Sainz 9th. He was perhaps a little bit unlucky to finish behind the Ferraris after being jumped at the VSC restart, and he was only that close to them because they both took the pit stop under the VSC. But there was some unseen aggro, wasn't there, with Williams?
Yeah, it's been an interesting weekend for Williams. There's almost two aspects to it. In pure performance terms, hugely encouraging. Brilliant performances pace-wise from Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. Potentially, third quickest team, you could argue. I think probably quicker than Ferrari on pure pace terms this weekend. So, fourth quickest team behind Mercedes, sorry. So, very strong performance. And I was quite liked those quotes from Carlos Sainz on Saturday. I spoke to him in the media pen about the pace of the car, and he said, half of him feels a little bit kind of pondering whether they should actually put some development onto the car, because he knows that if they did some updates in areas, he says he knows where they can make improvements. And the fact they are 3 tenths off pole position, that's a gap that could be closed. So, imagine they pushed on and did it and unlocked everything. He knows the plan is to keep stuff for 2026. He's spoken to JV about it, and he says JV's a man of his word. He's sticking to the 26 plan. It's not coming forward, so they can push on. But I don't think they've got anything to fear, because that car is quick, it's consistent, it's pulling points back, and the pace is good. I think the difficulty from their perspective is that it's been an operationally difficult weekend. It hasn't been particularly clean on lots of fronts, and that followed through in the race as well, because Carlos had to start on a new set of tyres because he hadn't got enough tyres left because of the way the weekend had panned out up to that point. Then, amid the kerfuffle with Lando and Max and a bit of the shenanigans going on there, the pair of them banged wheels a little bit. Carlos picked up a little bit of damage, so slightly on the back foot, got back ahead. Then they were racing and trying to work together as they did in Jeddah from Carlos's perspective, saying, if we hold position, we can push forward and it's all good. He was told that they were going to hold positions, and then that didn't happen. Alex Albon overtook him. So a bit of a question. Carlos not particularly happy. He said it made him look a bit foolish for this to happen. So it's something they need to kind of speak about and understand. But those are the things that can be tidied up. I think, as I said to Carlos in the pen yesterday, if you're a Formula One team, the main issue, difficulty and headaches, always the performance of the car. Everything else can be sorted out relatively simply. But if you don't have a car that's performing, that's a very, very difficult problem to get yourself out of. I think Williams got a strong car, they can sort the other stuff out and push on quite a bit.
Yeah, and certainly a track that played well for them with the straights and sort of relatively simple corners. But Alex Albon had a very, very strong weekend. Obviously a cracking 5th place in the main Grand Prix. Lost his result in the sprint, but you can say he was a little bit unfortunate given it was to do with the speed under the safety car delta times, but it was also kind of a fair cop thing. So it wasn't an unjustified penalty, but a little bit unfortunate that he got it. But strong weekend for Williams, and Sainz at least can be happy to have picked up a couple of points for 9th, and he survived that late clattering of Hamilton as well. There was a investigation into that, but no action taken over that one. Now, Scott, the more high-profile team orders kerfuffle was obviously Ferrari. Both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were unhappy with the way their race to 7th and 8th was handled. Did they have a point?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think Ferrari managed either part of that necessarily as well as it could have. Fred Vasseur took issue with me asking why it took so long to swap Hamilton and Leclerc the first time. He didn't think it took that long. He claimed it only took them about a lap and a half, and that they could have maybe done it a half a lap faster, but they wanted to establish whether or not the only reason Hamilton was looking that good relative to Leclerc was because of the DRS, being in the tow and having the benefit of the DRS. I noted that in the Ferrari press release, the reason was given as wanting to make sure that Leclerc would be safe from signs when they made the swap. Now, maybe it was both factors, but it's just interesting that in one setting, Fred said one thing, and then in the press release, it's sort of stressed as another point. I think the difference of opinion over like how long it took comes down to when you believe the sort of clock is started for when they could make the decision, and I would say it started sooner than what Fred is saying that it began. For me, it's very simple. You've got an offset strategy. You've got, as a result of the way it's played out, the cars are close together on track, and the car with the faster tyres, better tyres for the theoretically, and showing better pace is behind. I don't think you need to wait to establish where that pace advantage is coming from, given that particular set of circumstances. Just make the switch, minimise the race loss, minimise the damage to the tyres, the softer tyres that are on the second car, and see what happens from there. If Hamilton then races up to Antonelli, great, he can then start attacking for more positions. If over the next few laps he actually doesn't make great inroads and Leclerc's sticking with him easily within DRS and the tow, then you've got the information, don't you? And you can make the swap back, like they did at the end of the Grand Prix anyway. So I just think that I don't think it needed to be sort of overthought in the way almost that it was. And then at the end of the race, I completely agree with the notion in principle that if you've made that swap and it hasn't worked, then you swap the positions back, right? That's just how that's established, not just within Ferrari, but across every team on the grid. We've seen it for years. But there was just that degree of like Leclerc was arguing back and just saying, no, don't worry, let's just try and get Antonelli and we'll deal with it later. He was kind of just shrugging at it, and they forced through the swap anyway, which is kind of it's nice in terms of enforcing your principles, but it felt like it was probably a bit unnecessary.
It was just one of those funny situations, wasn't it? Because you ended up with them not doing it early enough to let the car that was on the quicker tyre at that phase not do damage to the tyres, but then they swapped it in time for the car that was then on the tyres that had been damaged a bit to potentially hold up the other car. So it was just from that perspective, it wasn't ideal. Having said that, The big problem was the Ferrari wasn't very quick, so it's not like they'd have been surging through and making up positions if it was well executed. But I just thought it was a tiny bit flat-footed, and it made for some amusing radio comms as well, which are always eye-catching.
Yeah, Hamilton was in great form, wasn't he? He was. I don't know if he's had. I don't know if he's got some professional comedy writers or something on his payroll at the moment, but he had some choice ones, didn't he? Today, I think a couple of them might genuinely be like modern day radio Hall of Famers. The one about have a tea break while you're at it, I think genuinely that tickled me for like half an hour afterwards when he said that. That was good. And then obviously the one about when he was warned about Sainz being, what was it, like 1.5 seconds behind, and he just said, "Do you want me to let him by as well?" You could sense the kind of like frustration and way he was dealing with it. But yeah, as you know, Fred said in his media session afterwards, the main issue there isn't kind of managing that better or worrying about Lewis's relationship with the team or anything. It's the fact they were a minute behind the race winner. It was a very, very bruising weekend for Ferrari, which I think kind of exposed the issues that it has in getting the most out of its car in key moments. It did look a real handful to drive in qualifying for both drivers. So I think it was faster than it looked in qualifying. It was just really hard to get the tyres there for some reason, and then also actually execute the lap. So race result wise, I think Fred might be right. As a team, they probably did get the best result they could have today, but they probably should have been higher up. And to be where they were, comfortably beaten by one Williams and struggling to beat the other, just that's the quality of Ferrari's weekend.
Yeah, and the quality of their season in many ways as well. Obviously, Hamilton did get that third place in the sprint, but again, that was partly down to the timing of the pit stop to go on to slicks. Wouldn't have been third without that. So, another difficult weekend for them. Let's talk now, John, about Yuki Tsunoda. He was 10th in the Grand Prix. He also picks up 3 points for 6th in the sprint, albeit after 4 of the drivers were penalised. Any concerns that he's plateaued a little bit?
No, I wouldn't say plateaued, but I think the improvements now get more difficult from here on in. I think he's done enough to have justified the switch with Lawson. I think he's kind of knuckling down as much as he can with a very tricky car. I think the difficulties now is pushing on and then moving himself up that rankings to get a bit closer to Max in a very tight pack. In a car he still doesn't understand. He had hoped that run in the TPC test at Silverstone and the gap between Saudi Arabia and here would be a help, but it was washed out by the rain. He didn't get anywhere near experimental setups. So I think there's a lot of work, still a lot of work for him to do. Obviously, Max had the new floor on the car this weekend, so we don't know what performance benefit that gave. And it was a tricky weekend, for Red Bull, as Max Verstappen's deficit to McLaren showed. So, yeah, I think you can't read much into Yuki's points in the sprint because I think it owed much more to other people being out than him being in. Race today, perfectly fine, nothing sensational. But I think now's the time to knuckle down, spend the next 2 weeks at the factory, working with the team, trying to understand a bit more about the car setup, and then hit the ground running from Imola.
It's also worth noting that Izzat Hadjar was really close to getting that final point because Tsunoda had that 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, and he was actually ahead at the start of the last lap on that, but I think he lost just over a quarter of a second. I think a big part of that was just struggling a little bit into turn one, and that meant that I think it was 0.168 that Tsunoda held on to the 10th place by, so that created a little virtual battle at the end of the race, and Hadjar a little bit frustrated, but a good weekend from him overall considering the pace of the Racing Bulls.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss. Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes!
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it. You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz, spritz.
Spritz, spritz. boots? Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back. Use as directed.
Faraday presenta Ojos con Alergia y Picazón contra el jardinero. Y el ganador es Faraday Extra Fuerte. Para aliviar la picazón de los ojos por alergia, actúa más rápido y supera a Claritin y Flonase aún a las 24 horas. Faraday, adelante.
Now it's time for our regular questions section where we answer questions about the Grand Prix that have been sent to us by the Race Members Club. If you'd like question asking privileges plus a load more perks, then now is the perfect time to join the Race Members Club because you can get 75% off your first month in any of our tiers as we celebrate Formula One's 75th anniversary this month. The Race Members Club really is manna from heaven for F1 fans. You'll get all of our podcast episodes ad-free, plus our regular bonus episodes, the opportunity to quiz me on my driver rankings, plus loads of behind-the-scenes content from every race weekend. And I can now exclusively reveal that we'll soon be releasing a 6-part series on driving style secrets where myself and Mark Hughes will be going deep on the driving styles of F1's best drivers. This series will only be available to the Race Members Club and nobody else. So if you want to hear it, join up today. To sign up now, head to patreon.com/the race and choose any of our tiers to claim your 75% discount. Right, let's get on with a batch of questions from the Race Members Club. Thanks to everyone who sent questions in. And as always, we'll tackle some more later in the week in some way, shape or form. First question to you, John, from Jake Nelson. What makes McLaren not as good over one lap as they are over a race distance?
Two separate factors, actually. I don't think they are linked. Andrea Stella was asked this actually today. He said, are the characteristics you're struggling with in qualifying a kind of the flip side of why the car's so strong in the race? He said, no, they're two separate factors. The qualifying issue seems to be related to when that car's on the edge, the drivers aren't getting the kind of feedback they need to do on what it's doing, especially under heavy braking. So it kind of locks up. They don't get the feel until it's locked up. And then that either then loses them time because the car's locked up or lose them time because they're so nervous about it locking up that they don't attack as well as they can. So they can't get the repeatability of the car in qualifying, and this is exposing tiny little weaknesses in getting consistency of a lap. So that's the problem in qualifying. Then the gain of the race is just tyre temperature management. I mean, it is incredible what they've done. Good engineering, says Andrea Stella tonight. It's something they worked on really heavily over the winter to address. I think they're surprised how big a step they've made, but whatever they've done in terms of those rear brake ducts, the rear brakes, whatever is going on inside that rear brake drum, it's a step above everybody else. And that's basically the story of this weekend in particular. And it will be the story of hot races. Races where thermal management is absolutely critical. And now it's up to the opposition just to try to work out exactly what they're doing, what's so brilliant about it, how they copy it and get on and do it themselves.
Next question for you, Scott, from Garen Moreno. Are Lewis Hamilton's frustrated comments to Riccardo Adami an artful precursor to removing him as his race engineer? With as much experience as Hamilton has, he must know when an engineer is capable or not.
Yeah, there's been a lot of attention in the first few races on Hamilton's radio exchanges. The information that he's been demanding from Adami has been quite consistent, and sometimes it flares up more than others. It's very hard to judge, honestly, where that's at. You speak to some people at Ferrari, as I've done, and they insist that actually the two of them get on extremely well, not just not in defending the radio exchanges, but just outside of the car, the way they behave in engineering, the way they talk to each other, they're developing a good relationship. Others believe that what is going on over the radio is completely normal and is just is part of going through it. And we know that all drivers, and Hamilton's no exception, can get very terse over the radio. But there are others who think that it's evidence of just a fundamental disconnect in the way that maybe it's a Ferrari engineer thing, maybe it's an individual thing, whatever, between the way they want to communicate, what information is needed, how it needs to be expressed. I think the exact radio messages we heard today, amusing as they were to us, were a combination of the usual venting from a driver that's annoyed at the situation that he's in, and a little bit of just confusion and exasperation at the extent to which Hamilton felt it was just being mishandled. And so it was less about that's the thing in that situation specifically. That's not a thing about Adami. That's he knows that his race engineer is not the strategist. It's a frustration overall at the situation that they're in, and a question in the Ferrari's overall handling of it as a team. And Adami in that situation is just the vessel that is used to vent through.
Next up, a question that I'll take from Rasmus Weed. Is this the turning point for Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari? It seems like he was in a happier place this weekend, and Alex Bentley asks, how was Hamilton able to stay closer to Leclerc on pace? I don't think it was a turning point. It was better by some margin than Bahrain and Jeddah, but it was also a track that was less showing up the things he's been struggling with in terms of the instability. The instability's still there in the car, but in high speed it's a big problem. So it was fractionally better, but I don't think it was a step change. And I also think that in terms of that position relative to Leclerc in the race, certainly with them being together to be irritated about team orders, that was facilitated by the way the race had played out. The gap would have been bigger. So it was a I wouldn't quite call it a step for Hamilton, but I'd say it was a little sort of shuffle forward. Let's put it that way, but certainly not a turning point, not enough of a swing for that. John, a question now for you from Oscar Robledo. Given the clash between Kimi Antonelli and Max Verstappen in the pit lane during the sprint, is it advisable to increase the speed in the pit lane just to spice up the show by encouraging more pit stops?
Yeah, I mean, I think that error is something that, if you release a car into the path of another car that's coming in, I think that incident happens at 60, it happens at 80, it happens at 100. I think you've got to have there. Obviously, the quicker the cars come, the more chance of mistake. And this is why the FIA doesn't want to go down the route of increasing the 80-kilometre pit lane speed limit, as it was this weekend, for example, up to 100. Thinks everyone's got used to 80. I think ramping it up to 100 would cause a lot more problems. No one in the pit lane is used to having a car coming down at 100, so all that kind of muscle memory and brain memory of where cars are and how quick they arrive would have to be changed. So that won't happen. So what they are only looking at doing is raising some of the 60-kilometre-an-hour races where the pit lane has been a bit narrow in the past. So the rest of them talking those races at Monaco, Zandvoort, Singapore, for example. If they can adjust the pit lane, then potentially they can stay at 80, which is the standard speed. I think Monaco's too narrow, can't be done anyway. So you're potentially looking at Zandvoort and Singapore. Questions then, and can they move the pit wall or just adjust things slightly to allow the speeds to be increased? So I think it's a good solution to doing it. I don't think it's going to raise dangers anyway, because teams are used to 80 kilometres an hour, and it will only happen if the FIA is convinced that safety is not compromised.
Question for you now, Scott, from Stuart Edwards. Why did Max Verstappen not get investigated for impeding Lance Stroll in SQ1? Stroll clearly had to move offline and lost enough time to miss out on SQ2.
Yeah, it basically came down to the fact that Stroll wasn't the car immediately behind Verstappen as he was approaching the final corner on what was going to be an outlap, and then due to a mix of circumstances ended up being an aborted run into the pits anyway. Lando Norris was behind Verstappen initially most of the way down that straight, and had followed Verstappen as Verstappen was doing the last little bits of his preparation for the outlap, and then when Verstappen did get on full throttle and head towards the final corner, Norris tucked in, he had DRS open, he was in the tow, and he overtook him to claim the track position and get on with doing his lap time. That meant that Verstappen was on the racing line as Norris was passing him offline, and then the speed at which Stroll was approaching, and by the time he caught the Red Bull, basically the safest thing for Verstappen to do was to stay where he was, and Stroll did have to go round him, but that combination of all of those circumstances, plus even though Stroll's absolutely adamant it cost him the place in the next session, and it did compromise his approach, but I think there was a little bit of, because of that compromised approach, no one can say whether or not Stroll was then a little bit more cautious than he needed to be in terms of the way that he lifted and then braked again and blah blah blah, but it felt like it basically didn't quite get into the realm of unnecessary impeding. It was unfortunate, but it wasn't something that merited a penalty. Despite saying all of that, I'm not actually convinced by the fact that it didn't get investigated. It felt like the kind of thing that would have merited an investigation, but then sort of be dismissed through investigation. And that was the thing I think caught a few people by surprise, that it was kind of just dismissed with a cursory look once noted by the race director.
Next question I'll take from Hayden Hodgson. Can we talk about Fernando Alonso? Do we think he's maybe unmotivated at the minute with his driving? I just feel there's a fair few uncharacteristic mistakes this year. Well, obviously the spin in the race today was a slightly odd one. Didn't really change the destiny of the race, but it was a mistake. He was unlucky in the sprint. And I think there have been times when he's been a little bit demotivated, but I don't think it's universal. Like for the sprint element, he qualified superbly, and he would have had a really good result. Doubly so had they brought him in a bit earlier, because he was certainly pushing for that. I was following him during the race actually, and he was definitely talking about slicks quite a bit earlier. And then he had the collision with Lawson, and Lawson was held responsible for that. So I think there's moments where, certainly in the race, for example, today, I don't think he was super motivated, but I still think he's capable when he sees there's an opportunity. He showed that in the sprints, and he does make the odd mistake generally. It's maybe that rate of mistakes has slightly increased, but if you look back at the past few years, there have been errors happening here and there. So I think when the car's competitive, which doesn't look like it's going to be anytime soon, he will be there. Right, John, a question from JJ Cooper. Does Carlos Sainz have a point that Williams should try to develop this car instead of switching to 2026 development? Obviously, we've touched on that, but do you think they should stick with plan James Vowles, or do you think they should crack on, as Sainz was alluding to, and try and find some more pace?
Yeah, well, Carlos didn't say they should push on with development of this year's car. He just said in his head, he just thinks about what could be possible, which is slightly different. He accepts it. I think it's a decision ultimately that James Vowles probably has a much better idea of what the benefits are for next season. Because I think there is a danger for teams, and we, most famously saw this with BMW in 2008, that you throw everything and believe everything you're doing for the future is fantastic and it's going to pay off. But it doesn't happen, and you lose the opportunity of being right now. So from their perspective, Williams having a great season, maybe they could go on, but then the downside is that they don't do the work now and it goes on, and next year it doesn't pay off. But I think you're investing 6 months of work in exchange for, get 26 right, those benefits go on for 6, 7, 8, 9 and beyond. So I think it's the right decision. It's a strange season, this one, because some teams like Williams would love to develop on and they can't. And Aston Martin, for example, all the struggles they've got with that car that's stuck well towards the back with little hope of getting points and in regular pace terms. But they know there's nothing they can do very much to throw onto that car because it compromises next season. So I think it's just one of these years where people are going to have to do decisions that are painful now, but maybe they pay off in the future.
It's got a question for you from Matt Spatz. Can we get a better explanation on what happened to Liam Lawson's car? Was it the remnants of the lap 1 turn 1 incident with Doohan?
Yeah, very simple answer to that. Heavy damage picked up in that collision, as you'll have seen from the footage, and the onboard Lawson's car got clattered into in a big way, damage immediately, bodywork chunk taken out, flipped up into the air briefly as well. So you just end up in a situation where it took on big damage, which massively impacted the performance of the car. They hung on in the hope of rain and maybe being able to capitalise on something and being able to limp towards the result. But yeah, it was never on the cards, and a normal race meant that car was too damaged to get anything out of it.
There's a question I'm going to take in a minute about Jack Doohan, but first I think it's worth us catching up on a news story that's recently been published by you, Scott, about Jack Doohan's future or possible lack of Alpine future and where things are at. So what's going on with Jack Doohan, and could that collision with Liam Lawson that put him out have worked against him in terms of whether he's going to be in the car or not at Imola?
Yeah, there is a chance that this was Doohan's last start. Alpine is considering what to do on its driver front, whether it should continue with Doohan for now or bring in Franco Colapinto from Imola the next race. I don't think it's just a simple reaction to yet another problem. It hasn't been a good start to the season. It's the second time in 6 events he's not made it through the first lap. He's had a pretty substantial run of incidents over those 6 events in different forms: crashes, penalties, the Friday accident, as well in practice at Suzuka, for example. So, he's racked up probably quite a big damage bill now for Alpine. And the sad thing is, I think for him, is that this came on the weekend he finally out-qualified Pierre Gasly. And yes, it was on a weekend where the car was struggling and Gasly was particularly unhappy, but he was ahead. But Alpine's just at a point where we know that Flavio Briatore has been keen on Colapinto. I think he likes him enough as a driver, but it would be naive to think that Flavio is also not very excited by the possibility that comes on the commercial side with Colapinto. There's already one Latin American company at Alpine since Colapinto joined. That's Mercado Libre, and then there's there's an affiliation between another of Colapinto's backers and Eni, the company that's reunited with Team Enstone for this season. So who knows what might be possible there? And I think it's possible that Briatore is winning or could win the fight or the argument of this isn't coming together for Jack. Let's just make the change because Franco's a good driver and there are other upsides to putting him in the car as well, or potential upsides. So nothing's, as I understand, it's not like it's absolutely definite. I just know it's under evaluation, and there is at least a decent chance that they make the change. We wouldn't run that story if we weren't certainly of that belief and convinced by what our sources in the paddock are saying. And it's been a tense weekend for Doohan. He was very frustrated and upset after sprint qualifying on the Friday, when he felt that he'd been basically cost a chance of any kind of result there by Alpine, and the way they released the cars from the garage, which I'm not sure was fully right, but he got very emotional over the radio. I think he got told off in public view by Ollie Oakes, I think, in hospitality. It's certainly what I was seeing, and I think he was also getting a bit upset at the fact that the Netflix cameras descended on him on the way back straight away and were quite in his face. The Netflix cameras also chased Oakes out the paddock on Sunday evening as he left a bit early to go and get the flight. So there was a lot of attention on the Alpine camp this weekend, and it doesn't mean there's definitely going to be a change, but having been told on the record and off the record a couple of races ago that Doohan was safe for a bit longer, certainly until the summer, it now looks like a change is back on the agenda after all.
Yeah, we had a question from Ed Gaming who says, is there any justification for bringing back Sympathy Corner for Jack Doohan? It seems like he keeps showing flashes of deserving that seat, but circumstances keep undoing any hard work that he's done, like turn one today, where there was nothing he could do, but means he couldn't build upon a strong qualifying session. I think you can have sympathy for Jack Doohan. Having said that, I think he's also been the architect of his own downfall at times as well. So ultimately, I remember saying when it became clear that Colapinto was looming that Doohan had incumbency and had to absolutely nail it, and while there have been flashes, it hasn't entirely come together, and turn one was unfortunate, but equally it was also a scenario you could see unfolding with the way the race was playing out on the run to the first corner. So sympathy certainly, but not outrage, let's put it that way. But he just needs to, if he's in the car for Imola, get out there, deliver the pace, put together a weekend, and then actually have something to throw back at the team to say don't make the change, if they haven't, of course, already. Right, John, a question from F1 Debate Team. Talk about a boring race. What's the consensus on the tyre situation, and how are we in a place where we're still seeing one-stoppers on green track conditions?
I dispute the fact it was a boring race. It wasn't the greatest, but I actually quite enjoyed it. And, if Norris had cleared Max, at his first attempt and come out with 1.5 seconds to Oscar, I think it would have been a fairly interesting battle between the pair of them after that. I think it had potential to have the fight between them. It hasn't paid off. But yeah, the tyre situation is interesting. I think it's a consequence of Pirelli have modified their tyres for this season. They're much more durable, which makes they're not degrading as much as before. The teams are better at managing the tyres. They understand what's going on. The cars this season have more downforce, so the tyres aren't sliding as much, which further limits degradation. So all these combinations have come together to do this, and as even shifting the compound softer isn't working. So from what I understand, I spoke to Mario Isola, the Pirelli Motorsport Director, this weekend. He's intrigued by Imola when the C6 comes out for the first time, just to see what the impact is and how things space out from there. There will be a run of softer compounds, but I think the understanding is quickly coming there that just shifting compounds softer isn't going to work. So teams are too good. These cars have too much downforce. The tyres aren't in the right windows for this. So the longer term solution, other than those races where we raise the 60 kilometre an hour pit limits up to 80, is to start skipping compound choices. So you basically try to put teams off doing the one stopper by making the hard compound tyre much slower, forces you onto the softer compounds in effect, or you have to choose between the two, and we get these crossovers. So it could be C5, C4, C2, or you could even do a C5, C3, C1, or various ways of kind of mix and matching it. But I think probably after we're through Montreal time, after that, we'll start seeing some races where they skip compounds to, probably get us simulation machines and computers to give us some numbers and work out what the choices are.
Scott, a question from Thomas Kroll. Why didn't Max Verstappen get a penalty in the sprint for starting out of position? It looked nearly identical to Norris's alignment to his grid box in Bahrain.
Very, very, very far forward, very marginal, but not over the line. They have the imagery, they have a sensor. It's just as simple as that. He didn't go quite far enough forward, but I did. I was speaking to Christian Horner very briefly on the Saturday about that, and he did say with a smile there really, really was not much in it. So I think Max probably, we know that he likes to play this aggressive sometimes. I think he'd lined up quite aggressive on the formation lap as well to see what he could get away with. I suspect he might leave himself a bit more margin in the future, because I think that was very, very tight and very close to going over.
And the final question from Motorsport Mike. Were the penalties in the sprint deserved? Well, it's Max Verstappen, unsafe release, bang to rights on that one. Ollie Behrman, unsafe release, bang to rights on that as well. Alex Albon, delta time speed limit under the VSC infringement. Yeah, he did infringe it, a bit unlucky, but it had to be a penalty. And Liam Lawson for the collision with Alonso based on the guidelines. Yeah, predominantly to blame, therefore he gets the penalty. So yeah, they all cost them points, but they all had to be imposed. So yeah, deserved.
Good efficient stewarding from you there, Ed. I wish all decisions were made that quickly.
Well, it's easy when the decision's already been made and you've had the chance to look at it and read the verdict. But yeah, it did take a while with those, but that's the challenge when you got the sprint then going into qualifying. Right, well, thanks very much to everybody who asked questions. Thanks to Scott and John for answering them. And thanks indeed to John for taking my place in Miami. We do actually have another break now before the triple header starts with Imola, but we're going to keep on podcasting, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.